Washington County Water Consortium. I'm Adriana, a planner with Washington County's Public Health and Environment Department, along with my colleague Alyssa from Washington Conservation District. We host this monthly meeting to gather public and private partners to share ideas, information, updates, and lessons learned on all topics under the umbrella of water resources. We have two great speakers today, one joining us from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and the other joining us from the Minnesota Prescribed Fire Council. Before we get started, I want to briefly mention that if you have any topic ideas or have a presentation yourself, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always looking for new topics and ideas to share with everyone. A reminder that if you are interested in viewing past consortium topics or presentations, these materials are archived on Washington County's Water Consortium website. Before we move to the presentations, does anyone have any announcements to share? Okay, hearing none, we will go ahead and get started with our first speaker this afternoon, Rebecca Place, 3M Settlement Coordinator at the MPCA, who will be giving us an update on implementation and funding for the 3M settlement. With that, I'll hand it over to Rebecca.
Hello, hi, yes, I'm Rebecca Place. I work for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency as the 3M Settlement Coordinator, and I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about the new health-based values that were released this past year and the new maximum contaminant levels that also came from the federal government and the impact those have on the settlement, and then just a general overview of settlements spending. So hopefully, let's see here, I'm going to share my screen. Some of the first few slides are background information, but it's always good to go over. I'm going to move that. Okay. So just some
Rebecca,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. We can see like the presenter screen with all your notes.
Oh, okay.
And everything. Rather, I just want to give you a heads up.
Let's try that one more time. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just choosing a different one. Let's see which one works. There we go. How about that?
That is perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So in the as you may know, PFAS, chemicals with PFAS were disposed of before there were environmental regulation to not do that. In Oakdale, on this map on the left, there's the 4 disposal sites: the Oakdale disposal site, Washington County landfill, the 3M Woodbury site, and the 3M Cottage Grove site. And waste from their processing was dumped in these locations, and it has leached into the groundwater and is the source of the contamination of the 3M settlement. So we first found PFAS in 2004 in the East Metro, and then by 2007, there was the state and 3M have a consent order with each other that requires remediation at these disposal sites. It also requires that 3M pay for safe drinking water for the East Metro area for contamination that's tied to these disposal sites into perpetuity. So then in 2018, 3M settled with the state for $850 million for natural resource damages, and that's the money that we'll be talking about today. And then with that settlement, after they paid attorneys and set aside $20 million for to work on the natural resources, there was approximately $700 million left. Let's see if this works. Okay, so the 2 priorities of the settlement are Oh, here, I skipped a slide. Wait, did I skip a slide? No. The two priorities are first and foremost, safe drinking water for the residents in the East Metro area, and then just focusing on the quality of the water, quantity, and sustainability into the future for safe drinking water for the East Metro. And then the second priority, that's the 20 million, is for enhancing the natural resources. And that is a separate process. We have phase 1 and phase 2 have different project managers and a different process, different work group members. They are going out with a request for proposal for projects to spend that 20 million and enhance the natural resources this year. I will touch on that at the end. The breakdown of the 700 million is in this approximate 5 to 6 categories here. The first is capital costs for drinking water, and that's all the capital infrastructure for treating water, and that includes municipal water and the in-home treatment. We call them the point of entry treatment system, POETs, or otherwise they're called GAC filters, which is the carbon filtration system within the POET. That is all paid for out of this capital infrastructure allocation. And then second is this 115 million was set aside for operations and maintenance for temporary treatment and permanent treatment, and all the filter exchanges for those in-home filtration devices. 70 million is set aside for drinking water protection. That's looking at the source of the contamination. And then lastly, there was, well, not lastly, but 183 million for contingency and 15 million for state administration. A few more details here about the 3 buckets. Capital infrastructure is that I kind of explained this, but that's the treatment system and the POETs. And then operations and maintenance are both municipal and private wells, and then the drinking water protection. And that is that's continuing to monitor around the disposal sites and look at Project 1007, which I'll touch on in a few slides. We have just recently published a metrics workbook on Tableau Public Server. So if you Google Tableau Public, I'm going to try to open this right here for you, see if it works. If you Google Tableau Public, you'll get this page, you'll get a front page, and then you'll see this little search button up in the right. If you type in 3M settlement, you can kind of walk along with me. Otherwise, just watch and I will walk through it. But this is a workbook of our expenditures to date as of December 31st of last year. And it shows how much has been spent in total of the settlement. So these numbers, this is a little over 700 million because we have earned interest on the money while it sits at the State Bureau of Investment. It's been earning interest. So the number is a little bit higher than 700 million. But down here, you can see there are 30 active projects going on and there's 33 completed. In the lower right-hand corner, if you hover over the icons, it'll tell you about the project. This one, I believe, is in Lake Elmo, and it's repairs on 38th Street and 39th Street and utility improvements, and then they connect homes. So here it proposed that 49 homes are connected to municipal water. You can also filter by community. And then if you happen to be using this workbook and you filter and can't find your way out, just hit F5 and it'll reboot it'll reset the communities. But then up here in the upper right, it shows how much capital has been spent to date and then how much is remaining. So this, if you hover over, it's $161 million have been spent out of capital, and there's 198 remaining. And then this star is the 317 million, and then past the star is what we've earned in interest. And then this is how much has been spent in contingency and how much remains and so on. Then the second tab, it'll load for me, has to do with both the municipal treatment plants and the home connections and these point of entry treatment systems. So first, there's a target for connecting roughly 700 homes to municipal water that were not previously connected. Cottage Grove has connected 185, and then we've connected 180 in Lake Elmo, and Lakeland and Lakeland Shores have 28. You can also filter by community with this one, with this page. This one talks about municipal water treatment plants that are going in for the whole community. Woodbury is building one, Cottage Grove is building one, Oakdale, they're expanding on their temporary treatment facility, and St. Paul Park has already completed the build out on theirs. And then the point of entry treatment systems. This is a picture of what that looks like. It's 2 canisters in your basement. They connect it to right where the water comes into the house. And it's a lead filter and a lag filter. And then every year the lag is moved to the lead and they replace the lag filter, which is roughly $1,000 cost to the settlement to change that out. But then these are all the target is to install roughly 1,500 of these. And this is, if you hover over, it'll tell you how many per community. So West Lakeland has 596 of the POET systems installed. And then the last page are spending by community. This one, we ask you not to filter by this because it has a little glitch and it freezes, but you can hit F5 and it'll reset. But you can check out here, Afton, Cottage Grove. They have it also separated by which category. So O&M and Cottage Grove would be for the temporary treatment system. And this is the capital expenditures to build that temporary treatment. But then in Lake Elmo, you see more money from contingency and also the capital. And then the some of the O&M is for the exchanging of those filters in the POET systems. Yeah, so if you want to learn more about that, then that's where you can find additional information. I can shut this with, yeah, there we go. Okay, so in January of 2024, the Minnesota Department of Health released new health-based standards for PFOA and PFAS. And then on April 10th, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency announced final primary drinking water regulations for 6 different PFAS. And then I just put a link in here for later use that is Department of Health's website on how to reduce our exposure to PFAS because, you know, it's in so many products. The reasons why the levels keep going down and most recently went down from Department of Health is because the data available has improved. We now have epidemiology studies that include human studies, and previously there were only animal studies that they were using. And so now the risk of health effects is more certain with these human health studies, and the audience that they are focusing these numbers on are pregnant women, mainly developing fetuses, infants, and mainly because their whole diet is liquid and uses the water. So these levels are set to protect even the most vulnerable populations. And then, oh, my graph isn't loading. Oh. Well, most people experience low levels. Let's see if I go forward. Let's see if, oh, there it goes. It must be, you know, a progressive slide. But so this shows that the blood levels of PFAS, the PFAS in our blood in the East Metro it has gone down since they've phased out PFAS out of some products and have filtered it from the water. So that is a good thing to show how much it's come down. We still have a long way to go. The PFAS is still in many products, and obviously we're still trying to, people have access to safe water in the East Metro, but we're still spending a lot of money to make that happen and want to ensure it into the future. And then for the health-based values, those are based solely on human health and those epidemiology studies, and they're to inform policymakers. The EPA numbers that came out, those are enforceable standards. And so now that those have been set, and I'll just go forward to the numbers. For PFOA, it's 4 parts per trillion. PFAS is 4 parts per trillion. And then these other combinations are 10 parts per trillion. And they do the calculation to determine the HI value, which is 1. But these are enforceable. So municipalities will have to, maybe I left that out, but so municipalities will have to test their water. They're tested quarterly by Department of Health. If they are over for 4 quarters in a row, then they'll need to work to bring those levels down under 4 parts per trillion, or they are subject to fines. And they have 5 years from the date these came out to, or from the date they are issued a advisory to bring them down. But the Department of Health, as far as the health-based values, are still working out the details of how they're going to implement those values and the policies around that for municipal wells. But these, on the next slide, these are the wells that are impacted by both. So in our conceptual plan to spend the 3M settlement, we have the wells on the left. But then if you add the MCL number, that adds some additional wells. And then if you add the HBVs, that also adds additional wells in some of these communities. So there is an impact to our settlements spending into the future. And when eventually we transition back to the consent order just says any wells over the HI of 1. So we're not as concerned with the settlement about which regulation they're over. It really makes a difference for the community because you could be fined if you exceed the federal level. But for the purposes of the settlement, an HI of 1, which is triggered by the HBVs, will allow the settlement to cover the cost of making sure that is filtered and is providing safe drinking water out of that well. So the impact of the lower health-based values on private wells is that immediately when those came out, we knew that 650 wells in the East Metro that didn't previously have treatment would need treatment. And so we've sent letters to those residences, and they're currently either on schedule to get the POET system put on in their home. They've probably been offered bottled water by this time. But then there's an additional 1,300 wells that used a different method. The methods have changed also at the Department of Health, and with the equipment being able to test at lower levels, we now need to resample 1,300 residential wells to determine if they, with the new sampling method, would trigger that HI of 1 and with the HBVs. And so a little bit more information about our private wells, because there are so many in the East Metro, are that we began sampling in 2023. There's roughly 7,000 to 8,000 wells in the East Metro. Over 4,400 have been sampled. That was a number from December of last year. We have issued over 1,500 advisories, installed roughly 1,200 POET systems, and then we've connected 393 homes to municipal water. If you or someone you know is waiting for sampling results, this map is on MPCA's website. If you Google MPCA private well sampling, it's on that webpage. It's updated weekly. So some of those 650 that became advisories are now on this map. Some of them were up in the Tri-Lakes area of Lake Elmo. Others are just kind of sprinkled around. But you can see the disposal sites are these gray with the black squares. The gray is the disposal site, the black squares are monitoring wells. And then the blue dot is a well advisory, and the green dots are not a well advisory. So this is, and then if you, I think on the website, this is just a screenshot, but you can hover over the dot and it'll provide you with the sampling results. We are continuing to monitor the plume. 3M is required to maintain pump and treat systems at the disposal sites, and we also are doing sampling at those monitoring wells. We are also continuing to work on Project 1007, which is a conveyance system that mitigated flooding in that Tri-Lakes area of Lake Elmo, but it inadvertently wound up spreading contamination to kind of along the corridor to the St. Croix River. And so the feasibility study for Project 1007 will be complete this fall and will be released before the end of the year. And we're anticipating that they will report out on mitigation policy initiatives and mitigation suggestions for how we can remove PFAS from the groundwater, like a pump and treat system or a multi-benefit well array. The trick is that we'd have to raise funding to implement any of those policy recommendations. Okay, an update on 3M spending. So as of June 30th, the state had spent $146 million, and and then out of capital funding this past year, these are yearly expenditures for capital funding, O&M, drinking water protection, contingency, and state administration. When you have a year snapshot of that, like our legislative report is, it's hard to get the big picture, but I'll talk a little bit about that. Community projects funded from July 2023 to June 2024. That's our state fiscal year. These are just a snapshot of the bigger projects that were funded from the capital, the capital bucket, I'll say. And so that was 84 million this past year. And then anticipated awards for fiscal year 2025, which would be July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. And then a few of these might go into the latter half of next calendar year. So it could be fiscal year 25, and maybe some of these would be fiscal year 26. But there's over $450 million of projected grant awards. Now, these last two slides that summarize the projects and the grant awards, that's obviously not necessarily expenditures. That's just money that is tied up in grants and allocated to those projects. But we do like to encumber the funds, and then those funds are for that project only. So looking ahead at this 450 million, we're going to run out of capital funds. And so there is that contingency, 183 million set aside for contingency, and that will be used to cover the costs of the additional capital costs, most likely in fiscal year 2025. And then going forward, O&M will continue to be spent on maintaining those POET systems and operations and maintenance at the municipal treatment plants, drinking water protection. The additional items that come out of that drinking water protection is the sampling, the cost of the MDH laboratory and the sampling. So that will continue to pay for that, and state administration, obviously, for implementation of the conceptual plan. and the grant management. But we will take from all of these categories when necessary to pay for those capital costs. And the 3M settlement team will work with the work group members, and we have meetings and we keep them up to date on the spending and when we think reallocations would happen. Those meetings are all public. Everyone is invited. So we post them on our 3M settlement webpage of when they're coming up. There will be one this fall that has yet to be planned. So but we think it'll be within the next few years that we'll be reallocating money from those other accounts to cover the capital infrastructure costs. And we are starting to work with 3M Company to determine the path forward for when we transition from the settlement funds to back to the consent order. And so just as a reminder, if a well has a well advisory, that will be paid for by the consent order. And then if by chance there's a well that's being treated that does not have a well advisory, that would be covered by either the homeowner or local government, some other source. Oh, and a quick note on priority 2, the request for proposals has been written, the evaluation has been ironed out, and so there have been a couple of staff retirements. I know they're hiring staff to run the program, and we have a new grant specialist on board. So this will probably be coming out this fall yet, but that's to be determined of when the next step will happen for priority 2. If you want to sign up for GovDelivery messaging, you would see that grant opportunity as soon as it opens up. And there's also an email if you want more information about priority 2. But that's it. I'm happy to take some questions.
Thanks, Rebecca. We have one question in the chat, it looks like. It says, it took 9 months for me to get my test results back from October of last year. Was the delay due to lack of labs or backups, or because of wait for new standards to come out? Is the lab problem fixed?
Yes, that was kind of an all of the above with why it took so long. We understand that it's absolutely not acceptable for somebody to have their well tested and then not get the results for 9 months. There was a backlog because as soon as those new health-based values came out, that we had to get 650 well advisories out the door, and we had staff turnover. So there was a time when my unit of 6 was a unit of 1, and so it was difficult. But yes, so we're looking at the entire process so that we have now additional staff in that program. And we're looking at adding contractors because the bottleneck just moves. If you have more staff issuing more advisories or doing more testing, the lab can only take so many samples. At that time, they were only taking 25 samples a week. So now we have additional lab equipment to do additional samples per week and additional staff to issue the letters. But then you have the problem of the GAC systems. We need to have the people on contract to be able to install the GAC systems. And so, yes, everything along the whole process flow is being beefed up to deal with the new health-based values. And so I apologize that you had to deal with the stress of waiting 9 months to get those results.
And we've got another question in the chat also. There is some new information on the 3M Cottage Grove permit. Can you give us some information on that?
I do not work with the 3M Cottage Grove permit, so my limited knowledge of it is that there is a new industrial wastewater permit, and so the Cottage Grove facility will now be limited in the amount of PFAS that they can discharge to the Mississippi River. And I believe the permit might be on public comment, and there's been some meetings to discuss that, but that's really that's all I know at this time about that.
I can just add on to that that the public comment period closed on August 30th, and there was as Rebecca mentioned, there was several public meetings as part of that. Okay, the next question in the chat. Some wells that are up gradient of dump sites are mapped as having concentrations higher than the health standard. Is the MPCA looking for other possible sources?
Whenever we see something that looks like it's out of what of our expected, such as like the Tri-Lakes area, that is a little up gradient from, I believe, the Oakdale disposal site in Lake Elmo. But we do look at the footprint, I'll say, of the PFAS to determine for sure, because things aren't settlement eligible unless it's tied to those disposal sites. So we have to be sure that the PFAS footprint matches, and each disposal site has its own unique footprint. So like I believe PFBA is more common out of the Oakdale disposal site, and so you'd see that, more likely in the contamination area, but it doesn't always flow as we thought. We thought it would always go southeast, but sometimes if a new well is drilled, it might be pulled to the north. And so we do look at if there's other sources that could be a potential source instead of the disposal sites. But once we transition to the SACO, that's the consent order. It all has to be connected to the disposal sites in order for 3M to pay for it.
Okay, next question in the chat. Are the two wells in two categories for Woodbury that need work the same two or more?
Oh, the two in my one slide. I know they have a couple wells that I think it's well number 20 and 21 that look like they may be over at some point. The MCLs, if those are the ones you're talking about, that we're taking a conservative approach and what we do in that situation, I'm not sure that I'm answering the question, but we write a grant in a way that says, like, you can have money to plan for the PFAS contamination and do what you need to do to get ready. But then you have to have the well advisory in order for the settlement to pay for it to be filtered. But if it looks like it's going that direction, we don't delay. It's, we'll get ready to treat those wells also.
Okay, what is being done or will be done by MPCA to assist other Washington County communities, example Stillwater, Oak Park Heights, etc., that have PFAS in their municipal wells but are not part of the 3M settlement?
The work that I do, it really does tie to those disposal sites. If a resident in those homes has PFAS contamination, we have a hazardous substance program that the state still winds up paying for the filtration in some of those cases, although it's oftentimes a refund. So the homeowner would have to connect with our hazardous substance program, get the filtration put on, and then submit for reimbursement, and then the hazardous substance program would pay them back. If it's more of a municipal, I'm not sure. I'd have to talk to some colleagues about how we could help support that. But now there's PFAS with these MCLs being statewide, and there's PFAS across the state. The whole remediation division is working with communities on sampling and what to do about it. I'm just not as versed on that because I'm so entrenched in the 3M settlement.
Makes sense. Okay, next question. Should residents still use the East Metro PFAS sampling line? They list the phone number 651-757-2903 to request sampling for private wells in the East Metro.
Oh, that's a good question. I have here my number. Well, not my phone number, but my, let me just double check that number because we do have some staff that have moved on. And so I want to be sure it's not theirs. 651-757-2903. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's the East Metro Private Well program, and we have staff set up to be in charge of that weekly. So we've kind of revamped the system, and so someone should answer or get back to you right away if you call that line to be sampled. Or you can go on to the website, just Google MPCA private well sampling, and there's a form to fill out, and that'll also get you on the list to be sampled if you're looking for that.
Okay. Does Newport have any money planned for their system?
We are talking to Newport about their options of what they can do. Newport has been connected with the settlement, and so whether they do interconnects to other cities or treat their own water, we're working with them to determine what the best next steps are. So they would have funding available.
Awesome. Okay, it looks like that's all the questions in the chat for now. I just want to give a moment if anyone else, feel free to come off mute if you have a question or put it in the chat now. Kind of last call for questions for Rebecca. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. That was great. And Rebecca's presentation will be posted on our website probably next week. So anyone can review that information also going forward. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we will now move on to our next presentation. So next up we have Lane Johnson, Vice Chair of the Minnesota Prescribed Fire Council, who will be telling us about shaping the future of prescribed fire in Minnesota. I'll hand it over to you, Lane.
Hey, thanks for having me today. It's good to be with you all. It's a beautiful afternoon in Cloquet where I am, so I appreciate you taking time out of your busy lives to learn a little bit about the Prescribed Fire Council. So I'm here as a University of Minnesota employee, but the Prescribed Fire Council isn't really spearheaded or connected to the University of Minnesota alone. It's a conglomeration of interested parties that are involved across the state, coming from across the state. See if I can get my slide to move forward here. So the Minnesota Prescribed Fire Council, our mission is to promote and expand the safe and beneficial use of prescribed fire across the state. Our URL there, minnesotaprescribedfire.org, if you want to learn more. Right now, we're a voluntary coalition of the willing, a group that was formed through discussions with Minnesota DNR going back to 2015-16, with the council sort of officially coming together in 2017 in partnership with Minnesota DNR Division of Forestry. We have participants coming from all over the place, a really diverse mix of prescribed fire practitioners and prescribed fire allies. We have a steering committee that numbers around 12. We've got non-agency RX fire users and agency supporters as part of that steering committee. And really our target audience or our community is anyone that's not represented by the Minnesota Interagency Fire Center. The Minnesota Interagency Fire Center, or MIFC, is located in Grand Rapids. There's really a cooperative agreement between federal and state wildland fire management agencies. And so a lot of other people like the university, non-governmental organizations, the Department of Military Affairs here in Minnesota, Minnesota Department of Transportation, municipalities, local government, county land offices, all of these other groups are not represented by MIFC and have a place or can benefit from getting involved with the Prescribed Fire Council. For me, I'm a research forester at the Cloquet Forestry Center, part of the University of Minnesota, an outpost for the College of Food, Agriculture and Natural Resource Sciences. I'm a tree ring fire historian and really interested in how we apply historical records of fire to contemporary land stewardship, land management. And so I've been struggling over the past 6 or 7 years with the University of Minnesota to get fire on university lands in in Carleton County here at the Cloquet Forestry Center. And through the work I've been involved in with others and a wealth of other information that's out there in the literature, just local knowledge, we know that fire is the primary process that has shaped and perpetuated the ecosystems of the upper Great Lakes for millennia. And this is a process that's been pulled out or taken away over the last 120 years or so. And prescribed fire is really about bringing that process back to places that need it most. So for me, when I think of fire and prescribed fire, I think of it being very similar to water. Fire is elemental, it's essential, it's life-giving, it's cleansing, it's renewing. It can be a public good in the right places. It can be an ecosystem service. And for me, it's a caretaking obligation to places that I care about that are fire dependent. A colleague of mine who's the current chair of the Minnesota Prescribed Fire Council, I'm currently functioning as vice chair, worked on this project for the last few years. It's the Minnesota Fire Needs Assessment, and it was just released last year. And it's available through the Minnesota Prescribed Fire Council website. And it's using a nationwide data set called Landfire to look at where fire is needed across the Minnesota landscape, how frequent, how much, and looking at what intact systems across the state, where they are, what the ownership is, and essentially how much fire do we need on the Minnesota landscape to maintain the health and functioning of these native plant communities. So the map you can see here at image left shows the sparseness of remaining grasslands across the state, and also shows areas of hardwoods in the southern part of the state, and then these large continuous tracts of intact conifer forests in the northeastern part of the state. So a diverse range of conditions and ownerships and landscapes. But the big take home from this this fire needs assessment is that we are experiencing a 3 million acre annual fire deficit across Minnesota. There's 312 acres of grasslands and almost 3.5 million acres of forest land that could be burned annually to maintain the character of those native plant communities based on the historical disturbance regime. And for Washington County, I have this screenshot of a Tableau public interface that you can access through the Prescribed Fire Council website. You can see you can actually explore that interface by county and select the vegetation type you're interested in. So in the case of your county, and looking just at grassland vegetation types, there's an annual fire need of 1,000 acres being burned per year for the existing acres or the remaining acres that haven't been converted to a non-grassland state. So in other words, if you look at the ownership types across Washington County, 87% of grasslands in Washington County have no clear pathway forward for fire restoration because of the ownership and because of how fire is managed across the state. Likewise, if we look at hardwood, the hardwood vegetation type for Washington County, same deal, 87% of woodlands in Washington County have no clear pathway for fire restoration. There's some bright spots in Washington County. I saw Dan McSwain is on with Washington County Parks, and his prescribed fire program is perhaps a unique example within your area of a non-agency entity that's able to get fire onto public lands. And it'd be neat to discuss that a bit more during a Q&A later on. So this is an automobile in 1895, and I'm just using this as a kind of a visual for when Minnesota fire suppression policy was first enacted. And we've come a long ways. The fire policy in Minnesota in 1895 was just, as many of you already know, if a fire starts, put it out immediately, remove fire from all lands. Fire is bad, period. There's no consideration of all the beneficial aspects of fire ecologically and culturally. So this is a photo showing the consequences of causing fire in northern Minnesota in 1910 in the Boundary Waters region. And that same law remains in state legislation today, or it's codified in the Minnesota Wildfire Act that's currently used to guide how the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry manages fire across the state. And so we've had a fair bit of changes to wildfire legislation, but none of the updates that have been made over time have changed or destroyed any of the rights, obligations, liabilities, or penalties that were established in 1925 or before. And so in the case of us here in Minnesota, we have this prescribed fire, or we have this fire liability statute that was first enacted in 1911 in the new Forestry Act. And it states that whenever a fire is set by any person or corporation and spreads to and destroys property belonging to another, it shall be prima facie evidence that the party so setting such fire is guilty of negligence in setting the same and allowing it to spread. And so prima facie negligence is this rebuttable assumption of guilt. It can be refuted by the defendant, but it can be burdensome and difficult. So I think of it as a guilty until proven innocent scenario with liability. So anyone that's burning here in Minnesota has the potential to be considered guilty until proven innocent in the case of a prescribed fire escape or some sort of act of God related to a prescribed fire operation, whether or not they were actually negligent. So this is generally described as like a strict liability standard. And so I'm using this Ford Mustang Mach-E, this electric vehicle, to kind of visualize the advancement we've made as a society since 1894. But I'm using this Ford Model T as a representation of the prescribed fire liability, or the kind of the fire management or prescribed fire legislation that we're dealing with here in Minnesota. Our restrictions on prescribed fire and kind of the challenges that prescribed fire practitioners face are created by legislation that's well over a century old. And we're seeing across the country that there are other ways to do things. And so this report at left, to Burn Back Better, that's put together by Tall Timbers Research Station out of Florida, and a few other groups are providing examples of how Western states can encourage prescribed fire on all lands, but private lands in particular. There's some really great insights from that report that are relevant to the Eastern United States and Minnesota in particular. And then there's also things like certified prescribed burn manager programs that are being developed across the country that's allowing for training and certification for non-agency fire managers. And so this Guild report that was put together in February of 2020 is getting updated and will be re-released in 2025, detailing all of the progress that's occurred in the past 5 years across the country, and very slowly here in Minnesota. So these types of reports make a few recommendations for prescribed fire generally, changes that can be made at the state level across the country. One stands out is an improved permitting system that removes bureaucratic obstacles to prescribed burning. They also recommend developing more flexible approaches to setting burn days in which different types of prescribed fire can be implemented. Recommend designing training opportunities and other resources to educate and support rather than regulate landowners' use of prescribed fire. And also the need to clarify and improve liability regimes to reflect the public benefits of prescribed fire. So viewing it not as a public nuisance, but really as a benefit to the public. So that's where the Minnesota Prescribed Fire Council comes in. We're working towards this vision of a Minnesota culture where prescribed fire is valued, accessible, and applied across all fire-dependent landscapes, regardless of ownership or agency affiliation. Our shared values, really rooted in things like collaboration, innovation, inclusion, community and service, and relationships and access. So we really striving to incorporate this into the work we do, these core values. And I'd say that we're not doing this perfectly, but it's something that we're certainly striving towards. A few highlights here with innovation. We approach challenges in new and creative ways, and we can't solve these prescribed fire challenges using the same thinking that created them. With community, we grow together through the exchange of ideas, expertise, and place-based knowledge. And relationships, we work to sustain the fire-dependent lands and communities that sustain us. So Prescribed Fire Council really is about bringing together a community of practitioners and like-minded allies that want to see fire conserved and expanded across the state. So goals that we established during a strategic planning meeting we had in July of this year. We've got five, I believe. Goal number one is to build a community of prescribed fire practitioners that prioritizes relationship building, the transfer of diverse knowledge, and meaningful collaboration. So example of this is for the photo here is a collaborative that's involved or centered on the Fond du Lac Reservation here at the Cloquet Forestry Center, where we're restoring eco-cultural fire to these fire-dependent pine woodlands that were historically important hunting and burying grounds for the Fond du Lac band, and fire being used as a restoration tool for bringing back fire as both an ecological process, but also as a cultural practice by the Fond du Lac band. Goal two, advocate for policies, legislation, and other changes that create a supportive regulatory and liability environment for beneficial fire implementation. The photo here's a group that gathered in St. Paul at the central office for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and we had a meeting with Minnesota DNR Division of Forestry leadership to discuss some pending legislation that was introduced in the 2023 session, and we'll be able to talk about that a little bit later, on during the Q&A. Goal three is to ensure accessible training for prescribed fire. We hosted a 2-day collaborative burners gathering at Camp Ripley over in Little Falls area in the spring of 2023. Had a really nice mix of folks come together representing both agency and non-agency practitioners to learn from one another and to tour sites on the Camp Ripley space to talk about both ecological and cultural considerations for prescribed fire implementation in that landscape. Probably the greatest benefit of that gathering was spending time with folks from the Mille Lacs Band Tribal Historic Preservation Office and hearing their perspectives on both opportunities and challenges with prescribed fire on cultural resources. Goal 4, build support for beneficial fire in Minnesota through education and outreach. So there's some photos here from our January 2024 gathering in Dakota County. We met at the Dakota County Extension Office, had a group of around 50 folks participate in the indoor session. And then we went out into the field to tour sites both with Dakota County Parks and with Minnesota DNR Division of Wildlife to see fire restoration efforts in that particular landscape and learn from the folks doing that work, what's going well, what's not going so well. Goal 5, support on-the-ground implementation of beneficial fire. We're doing this in really diverse ways, but it's basically when there's partners involved that are involved with the Prescribed Fire Council or not involved, but we'd like them to be. We're making ourselves available to share knowledge, share resources, help one another on burn days, or help one another with the planning process or brainstorming, working through challenges with implementation. So we've got a photo here at left. This is a private lands oak pine underburn that occurred near Pillager, Minnesota. It's a project that's multiple years in the making, is led by the Nature Conservancy, but the fact that it's on private lands in a landscape where a lot of private land burning isn't occurring, pretty notable effort. And we had folks from Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe, and the University of Minnesota turn out to help the Nature Conservancy get that burn implemented. And then just burning in highly visible areas. So a photo here at right, burning this pollinator garden adjacent to our main entrance to our primary education and meeting space at the Cloquet Forestry Center, and doing this using doing it legally, but using methods that are not necessarily closely aligned with the standards of the National Wildland Fire Coordinating Group, NWCG, which is something that is connected to a national standard that the feds and the state follow. And then goal 6, to grow the Minnesota Prescribed Fire Council brand and administrative capacity. These are all the partners that are, I guess, heavily involved right now with the Prescribed Fire Council and our functioning and different initiatives. And the plan is to, in the next couple of months, have a logo and branding and kind of colorways that help us as a council represent ourselves and all the partners that are involved, but in our own way, sort of separate from all these other entities. So just an example of something that's underway right now and going to be rolled out later this fall and into the new year. Jason Anderson with Pheasants Forever is putting together 3 prescribed burn association trailers, and this is essentially like a prescribed fire equipment can be checked out like a library book, and this trailer could be brought to a particular landscape where there's a prescribed burn association or a group of landowners that want to be working together to implement prescribed fire on one another's lands. And it's a neighbors helping neighbors model. And there's going to be 3 trailers built for use across the state. The trailers are a little basic, but also well equipped. Each trailer is going to have 2 UTV slip-on water pumps, They'll be equipped with backpack sprayers. They'll have protective clothing and things like Nomex and leather gloves. And of course, they'll be equipped with drip torches and gas cans for carrying drip torch mix. They're also going to be equipped with two-way radios and hand tools and signage for communicating projects that are underway to neighbors and passersby. And so Jason's going to be bringing these trailers up to Ely to be showcasing these as a resource during some prescribed fire related education and outreach events occurring this fall. And I know that he'd be keen to bring these trailers to any events that are being planned in Washington County, both from an education and outreach standpoint, but also getting groups set up to actually be able to use this equipment for implementing prescribed fire projects of their own. So if you want to learn a little bit more about us, our website, minnesotaprescribedfire.org. You can also access the Minnesota Fire Needs Assessment through the website. And that Tableau public interface is available at the bottom of the Minnesota Fire Needs Assessment page, another clickable link. And if you want to learn a little bit more about my research and why it's relevant to the functions of the Prescribed Fire Council, you're welcome to check out this Z-link, the shortened URL. And with that, I wanted to leave plenty of time for just Q&A or discussion.
We've got one comment in the chat lane. It says, Brian says, boy, you have a mountain of resistance to this with the large amount of fuel from dead spruce in northern Minnesota, the out of control Oklahoma prescribed fire, and the general publicity about fires being bad. Good luck. Do you want to address that comment or speak to that perception a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Brian's saying there is very valid. A lot of what we're talking about as a prescribed fire council is inherently counterculture. And I think that's very much been reflected in the conversations we've been having with Minnesota DNR and the Division of Forestry. And it's something that we're actively working against, and I think it's a worthwhile effort. But yeah, I'd say U.S. society as a whole just has this this natural reaction to the thought of fire and like fire bad. That's what we've been trained from from a very young age. Don't play with fire. And what we're talking about here is working with fire for the public good and for the good of these fire dependent systems that we rely on. So it is what it is.
We've got another comment in the chat or question in the chat. Can Stillwater/Grant residents 10 acres or better gain access to prescribed burning in 2024? If so, do we contact our local fire department first? Is there a protocol to follow? Thanks for the call.
Yeah, so these are the types of questions we want to help people navigate, and place matters quite a bit. People matter quite a bit. That's really what prescribed fire is all about, is people in place. I'm certain that there are avenues for someone like a Stillwater or Grant resident to get fire on to their land, maybe not necessarily in the fall of 2024, but motivated individuals could reach out to us with the council directly, and we could get you tied in with additional resources. I'm not sure who manages your permitting for prescribed fire in the Stillwater area, if that's administered by the Minnesota DNR or by the city of Stillwater. So exploring that first would be most appropriate, and then connecting with your permitting agency or entity to learn what their concerns or what their tolerance is for prescribed fire in your landscape. But yeah, if you've got 10 acres of grassland or woodland that you think is receptive or kind of ready to go for prescribed fire, there are certainly mechanisms to make that happen in the coming years.
Okay, we've got another question in the chat. Can experienced land stewards still provide this service for payment?
Yeah, so I think the question Valerie is asking is related to like contractors providing a prescribed fire service as part of their work. Can you kind of confirm or restate your question?
Valerie, feel free to come off mute too if you'd like to kind of clarify.
Sorry, I didn't see where I would come off. Yeah, like a contractor that's licensed or skilled in it, they must have some sort of certificate in it that can provide this service. I'm putting in a small shortgrass prairie. So I'm working with a land steward or a contractor, yes, that Washington County provided. The resources, a few resources that are experienced in an install and then maintenance of a shortgrass prairie. And my understanding is he could provide a burn if he got approval.
Right. Yeah, that's accurate. There's a number of businesses or contractors across the state that are doing prescribed fire as part of other restoration work or maintenance work. Right now, there's no formal certification process for those contractors to say, yes, we are qualified at this level and recognized by the state as qualified. They're largely pointing to prior experience, maybe other work out of state or in state on private lands, or maybe they've received formal training through work with an agency like Minnesota DNR or the U.S. Forest Service. But
Right.
yeah, there's a number of entities that are providing that prescribed fire as a service, and based on the owners and their staff, they have, I guess, different, comfort levels with the types of burns they're implementing, both with size and complexity and the type of fuels that are there.
Sure. But that would be an option for Dean if he is looking for someone, is contacting Washington County, getting land stewards that are experienced in it and have them come and assess his space, right?
Yeah, I think working with contractors could be good. Working with local SWCD could be valuable, or folks with NRCS are also welcome to reach out to me through the Prescribed Fire Council, and I can connect you to other resources, folks that are active with the Prescribed Fire Council, like different chapters of the Prairie Enthusiasts
Right.
in southern Minnesota.
Okay. Thank you.
I'd say reach out and to get as many perspectives as possible from the practitioner community, because there's value in getting feedback from people with a diverse range of experiences and knowledge.
Right.
Are there any other questions? Again, feel free to come off mute or comments or anything, or put them in the chat, either one.
It also looks like Mike Lynch with Forest Stewards Guild is on. So if folks have any questions about the Minnesota Fire Needs Assessment, Mike is likely able to come off mute and talk about the behind the scenes work or the methodology there, if that's of interest.
I have a question about the the trailers that you were showing the pictures of. When people, I know it's like not implemented yet, but how will there be like training that goes along with those, like using those trailers? Will you folks come out and help people, or like how is that process going to work, or do you know yet?
It's gonna be different depending on where the trailer is being used in the state, or the trailers are being used in the state. The idea is that the trailers are meant to be an incentive for private landowners to come together and like form prescribed burn associations. Those are entities that don't yet exist in the state, but exist in other parts of the country and are really valuable mechanism for getting fire on the ground on private lands and doing like cross-boundary stuff in landscapes where you have kind of a mix of ownerships and not a lot of support from agencies for doing work on private lands. So as far as training, I believe Jason Anderson with Pheasants Forever, his goal is to provide training to any entity that's planning to utilize or host that trailer. And he would be doing that using NRCS funding. And the goal is for him to get more fire in the grasslands of Minnesota, which is, heavily private, and getting private landowners comfortable with working with the basic tools that are provided on that trailer.
Lane, this is Dan McSwain. Thank you very much for all the work that you're doing, as well as everyone else on the council, to move all these items forward. I was just curious on that update that you had as things that are moving forward, and maybe just to provide context for people who don't know, but it can be very complicated when it comes to obtaining your local permit, DNR variance. There's paper copies, there's electronic, there's kind of a mixture of things that happen with that, and a lot of communication associated with it. And just wondering if you could touch on that modernization of that process that you had in the PowerPoint.
Yeah. I think there's a vision for a much more, I guess, complicated overhaul down the road, but near term, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources has funding from the federal government to be developing a prescribed fire portal. And it's like a web interface where permitting for prescribed fire practitioners would be conducted through a digital interface that would have a geospatial component. And so it would allow people to see, it would streamline the permitting process that you're describing, Dan, but it would also allow burners to see where other practitioners are getting fire on the ground within the Minnesota landscape. And it would also allow for tracking of prescribed fire acres or accomplishments annually, which is something that's not happening right now on private lands. And so it's our first chance to really modernize how prescribed fire permitting is done, not just to I guess create restrictions and like limit burning on the landscape, but to allow us to assess like the progress or the successes that are being had across different parts of the state, across all ownerships and jurisdictions within the umbrella of the Minnesota DNR forest lands. Does that answer your question, Dan, or are you thinking there was more?
That was perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so that prescribed fire portal is something that DNR is funded or has funding for, and it's in the queue, but it's not something that's started quite yet. And we're not completely clear on the timeline, but I'm hoping it's online in the next 2 to 3 years.
Just want to give a last call. Any more questions for Lane? Well, thank you so much, Lane. And I think your email was in the end of the presentation, wasn't it? So if
Yep.
people have questions.
And my email and the contact of the current leadership team is on the Prescribed Fire Council website, so you're able to connect with us there.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for joining us. That was a great presentation. I really appreciate all the information that you shared. Thank you to our other speaker, Rebecca, as well. Thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you all next month. Have a great rest of your day.